back here on YouTube, if anyone uses YouTube, except maybe my mother and her friends. But for those of you that still use YouTube, I'm so glad you're back. I'm continuing conversations throughout Pride Month, and today Pride Month comes to a close. So sad. Yes, I hear you crying in the background. And so as we weep together, we also know that this Pride Month came at a really powerful moment in history because Pride once again became a protest. We went back to our roots as protests against police brutality are happening around the world. And so I'm so excited to bring back a special guest that was here last week and his partner as they talk about life, queer love, anti-racism, and all of this intersectional justice stuff. So welcome them to the show, and they're going to introduce themselves right here. And let's see if I added them in. Yes, here we go.
Hello. Hey, my name is Cameron. I use he, him, his pronouns. It's really good to be back with you. JJ, last time was really fun. And I'm here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin at Zao MKE Church.
Hey, y'all. I'm Jonah. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I have the honor and pleasure of being married to this incredible human being. Yeah, it's really lovely to join you after the powerful conversation last week between JJ and Cameron.
Oh, so cute. Already giving us all the feels. Yes, I'm so glad to have you both. And they ran from another meeting, so I'm so glad that you made it in time. And I didn't have to tell horrible jokes, so this is great. and so, okay, we're going to start off light. You know, this is the end of Pride Month. And I just love stories. So I would love to hear, before we dive into all of the important stuff, I want to know, first of all, how in the hell do queer people find each other in Wisconsin? Wisconsin of all places. How did you meet and how did this happen in Wisconsin?
You know, I had the same question because I'm originally from Chicago. And there's a pretty sizable queer scene in Chicago, and the work of the gospel and the church led me to leave my home in Chicago to go to, as you put it, Wisconsin. And I was like, why, God? And being single and a church planting pastor, I was very nervous. I was like, all right, life of singleness, here I come. There are no queers in Wisconsin. But it turns out there are queers everywhere. Sorry, conservatives. We are everywhere, and everywhere there are people, there are queers. Everywhere there is church, there are queers. And so I think the faithfulness of the call actually was a really big part of it for me, is just trusting that God will encourage love to bubble up and find itself wherever you go. And I think another big part was like a huge leap for both of us of being out. Which is no knock to anybody who has to be closeted. Like, I see you, that's real. And also being out even in a space that wasn't like one of the many queer meccas was, I don't know if it would have been possible for us to find love in the same way if we hadn't had some of those opportunities to just be out and find one another in queer spaces, and specifically in queer religious spaces. So I don't know, do you want to comment on that before I story tell?
I mean, it's really just Jesus. Like, honestly, like, I have no idea how this happened and how perfect this was. Without, I mean, there's always complications or whatever, but like, when people ask, like, how did this happen? I'm like, Jesus? Because there's no other way but that for me that this happened, so.
True.
Oh, I love it. Queer Jesus. Wow, so cute. Oh, yeah. Yes. In Wisconsin. So I do want to hear the story. So where did you meet?
Yeah, so we actually met doing ministry. We were both doing ministry in Milwaukee. I had moved up to start this little project called Zao, and it had a name, and it had like a monthly game night, and it had a few people meeting in my living room, but that was about it at that point. Meanwhile, Cameron was across town queering the church in a totally different way, and we actually kind of intersected first through those game nights, kind of these like social events of like queer-centered and trans-centered Christian space for like joy and fellowship and relationship building. And so we got to know each other a little bit, but it was contentious at first because Cameron was working at this other church being like, why are you taking all my queers? Why are all my queers going to your game night?
That's true.
And then we started to talk, and, you know, Cameron has had a different experience of church and what it means to be in a space that is holding tension with folks who are not affirming. And I was like, I'm over that. I'm done with that. I am no longer called to that. I am building spaces that are unequivocally affirming, and, you know, no turning back. I've decided to follow Jesus into my queerness, no turning back. And so we had those conversations. And so it was actually like not only us being in the middle of ministry and doing ministry that brought us into relationship with each other professionally, but being willing to ask those hard questions of like, you know, what kind of space should queer Christians hold, and how many different kinds of spaces do we need, and what feels right to me, and do you want to come to my really gay church party? And I think having those conversations really just drew us together, made us. Before I saw the love, I saw the collaboration. And I was like, you need to come be a pastor at Zao. And then I was like, okay, also, can you be my boyfriend? But yeah, we started spending time together. We hung out in the gym a lot for many hours, too many hours. And it just got cute and cuddly from there.
Oh, wow, so cute. Oh my gosh. Yes, I want to come to your gay party.
Welcome.
So as we are, you know, in Pride Month, talking about queer love and relationships and Jesus, you know, one thing that, you know, Richard and I, my partner, get a lot is the people that are so accustomed to the binary. You know, maybe it's more conservative Christian folks who have this idea of men and women in relationships, and like that clearly defines your role. Like one thing we get is, well, then who does the cooking? And so it's like those things that people take for granted of like, there are clear roles and this is how it happens. So I'm wondering, as another queer couple, what does this look like for you? How do y'all make a queer relationship work? And honestly, how has it been liberating for you in your own understanding of relationship roles?
Yeah. You want to take a stab at that?
Well, I mean, for me, like as a trans person, that's something that like we're constantly, or I'm not gonna speak for all trans people. I am constantly talking and assessing kind of the toxic messages that we get as a society. You know, so for me, it's like, what makes me a man? What makes something masculine? What makes something feminine, right? So I'm constantly doing that myself. And so I think when we're talking about relationship, that's a whole nother level of adding someone else to that, which says like, you know, there's such a, like you said, there's such a binary of like, you know, women do the laundry and the dishes and, you know, and then men go make the money and, you know, whatever it is. And so I think all of that is toxic. And I hope that like our queer and trans relationship helps rid like all relationships from that toxicity. And so I think that queer relationships are a blessing to the whole entire world. Trans relationships are a blessing to the whole world, so that we are asking these questions of like, why is misogyny making women stay in the kitchen? Like, that's bogusness, right? And like, so that's I think how it should work for everyone, which is like, hey, do you like dishes? I don't either. Crap, one of us has to do them. You know, so like, how are we gonna do that? And so like, that's how it should be, and that's how everyone should be. And so I hope that like, by us being queer and queering up the world, and us being trans and you know, transitioning up the world, that like we are helping have those conversations that really need to happen.
Yeah, right. I think it, like you're saying, it clears the slate of like, there are no expectations here. Like, we're setting the expectations together. And I had a conservative Christian friend who's had their own conversion to queer faith, that was saying like, but I just don't get it. Like, it makes so much more sense in straight relationships because like who's going to do the laundry. And like you're saying, it's like actually no, we've just taken that for granted. And these queer relationships give us the chance to say, what is all this garbage? Like, let's deconstruct this and let's start fresh on like an equal ground.
And that's so hard to do. That like I think you're
Mm.
right, Jay, that like queer folks and trans folks in particular have additional ground and additional urgency to deconstruct gender roles. But that doesn't mean that we always do it very well. So, for instance, like I've been, so I'm trans, I'm non-binary. For me, the word that most accurately describes my gender is genderqueer. And my sexuality is similar. It's just very queer. My romantic attractions, etc. So like in my history of dating, I've dated lots of different kinds of people. And I have noticed how even in queer relationships, how I'm gendered differently within the relationship by folks who are femmes versus folks who are men or masculine, and how that heteronormative framework for relationship really has rooted its sin in all of us. And I feel tremendously lucky that I have a partner who not only sees me for who I am, but also is willing to continuously work with me to see me for who I am and help me discover who I am, and is open to doing his own work to discover who he is and what that means for him. And our relationship, we didn't like magically get together and be like, oh, we get this and we know what the division of labor is, and it's a total defiance of heteronormativity. We actually had to negotiate that and talk about it openly. And I had to share, like, yes, when I like, these are the expectations that men have had of me when I've been in a relationship with them before. And Cameron has had to say, like, either, I see that I'm doing that to you too, or more often, I'm not even doing that to you, but you're defaulting to it. What the heck, you know? Yeah. So I think that the takeaway here is not that queers are like magically immune to heteronormative relationship standards, but that we have been given a holy opportunity to challenge them, and that actually everyone could be and should be doing it. And the urgency that we have gives us a special kind of power to do it now, and to invite other folks to deconstruct that stuff as well.
And it's not a perfect road. I know for me, most of my longer relationships were with women. And so for me, I think I had some like toxic masculinity stuff kind of bound up in the beginnings of our relationship. And I had to say like, ooh, I'm really sorry about this. Like, this is not cute. And like, I'm going to do everything I can to like make sure that I'm not bringing to our space, because I repent and I'm sorry, and like that's garbage, and I don't want to be a garbage partner, so
just the pastoralness of this talk is just so beautiful. Yes, and I think like you're saying, it's a process for queer people too, of like, yes, we've been given the gift in a way of we have a reason to go through this process. Whereas straight people don't necessarily, they should have that reason, but they don't right away. And so, yeah, I love that we all need to go into that process of saying, what is that garbage that we've grown up with or just carried along, and how to deconstruct that. And so some of that, it seems like, a lot of that, I feel like my coming out process also is part of that too, like deconstructing things I thought about myself and then deconstructing those in the midst of a relationship. And so last week we had the privilege of hearing a bit of Cameron's coming out story. So Jonah, I was wondering if you would share a bit about your coming out story and what role Jesus played in all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So my coming out story, I feel like, is not as clean or clear cut as some others. For instance, I like low-key forgot to come out to my sister, and then just like assumed that she understood and was like, oh, right, sorry. So there are some relationships that like I I just sort of lived into who I was, and then later had to give other folks language for that. But I think that there's something similar, and I don't know if this is how you talked about it last week, but there was something similar for my story about like coming out as queer and realizing at some point that my queerness had a lot more to do with my gender than my orientation. That the reason that I felt attracted across a spectrum was because I didn't fit into this binary category. And so there wasn't an obvious choice for me as a complement, you know, as a complementary heteronormative partner or whatever. Because I occupy in all these different spaces. And so my queerness is in my gender. And that took me an enormously long time to figure out, because I didn't, like, all right, let's go in the Wayback Machine. And it's like 7th grade, and I'm on the bus with Kelsey, I won't say her last name, who is one of my best friends. And we're on a band trip. And no, she really was she did not participate in this. I have those best friends too.
Okay.
But this was like actually like my best friend, and I was her best friend. So I just remember thinking, as we were like on this like field trip or something, looking over at her in the bus and thinking like, oh my God, Kelsey's actually like really cute. And then being terrified. I have this incredible, lucky context that like I was raised by a progressive Lutheran pastor and a progressive Lutheran, teacher, and I had queer religious leadership in my life. My godmothers, I have godmothers, and they are queer. 2 of them are queer pastors in the ELCA. And so, in any case, I had this example of queer public leadership, and I knew that could be okay, but I also saw how hard life was for them. And so when I realized that my sexuality was not gonna develop in this like traditional manner, I was scared, because I knew in that moment that I wasn't facing some wrath from God, but I knew that I was going to face some wrath from the world. And so I shoved that all the way down. And in the breadth of my queerness, I was like, oh, everybody thinks I'm a girl. I'm attracted to people that other people are calling boys. Good enough. I'll just like ignore all the rest of this part of who I am and who I feel drawn to. And so I tried to kind of suppress that. And it didn't work very well. I ended up engaged to an AFAB person and still somehow claiming that I was straight. And it was a real mess. It was a real mess. That was my best friend. Yeah. But we were getting married. But it was like on principle or something. I don't even remember. We were teenagers. But in any case, I had to leave the church even to entertain that relationship. And when I came back to the church, I found myself in this position where I was like, I'm straight, but there's nothing wrong with being queer. I'm cis, but there's nothing wrong with being trans. And I held that position well into my 20s. And it wasn't until I went to a Christian church with queer and trans leadership that I started to just like break down and be like, holy crap, I'm queer and trans. And so seeing queer and trans leadership in the church, not just in the world, not just in loving relationship, but in the church and leading in the church was fundamental to me accepting the fullness of who God created me to be. And then it wasn't until I accepted that and came out fully as queer and trans that I was able to see my call to church leadership. So I was this like baby closeted church, like queer trans pastor who was not out as queer, not out as trans, and not seeking my call as a pastor. And the church had to usher me into every one of those pieces, and they were all dependent on one another.
Oh, so beautiful. So beautiful and messy and like, yes, it's Right. And I'm so glad that people get to hear your stories. You know, it's so powerful to see trans people, you know, and see that like somehow we, you know, you still are in church and like what? God is still calling trans people and queer people. And so just, yeah, your presence here, I'm just so grateful for both of you. Um, and we also know that you face a double-edged sword, right? That you're not only a queer couple, but you're an interracial couple as well. And so, as we've been talking a lot about intersectionality of all of these different identities we have, and so you as a couple having the identities of a couple of color and queer and trans, and like having all of this come together, I was wondering if you could talk more about that. And you know, specifically, has there been an instant where it was just so overt, like, wow, this person hates us for both of these identities that we have, and that's just not cute? And if you have any tips from that experience about how other people, you know, might manage those situations.
Faye?
Oof. Yeah, I mean, like, I think that is such a, this is a discussion that needs to happen, because more and more people are making, you know, more and more brown babies, and I think like it's not a thing that either side really wants to talk about. You know, like white people don't want to talk about how they're having brown babies, and actually black people don't really want to talk about the fact that they're having mixed kids either, because it still feels scary to do that. And so it's a really important topic. I think for us, you know, if we didn't communicate in the way that we communicate, we would be toast, you know? But like we are people who will not back down, one, from challenges, but also from like the hard conversations. And so I think if we weren't those people, this would be much more difficult. You know, like especially right now, there are a lot of needs that I have or don't know I have, which is a part of our issue. But like there are a lot of needs that I have, a lot of emotional labor that I'm doing, being a black person in the world right now, that, you know, we're often having to say, like Jonah saying, like, listen, I'm taking my, you know, my stuff to my other friends, and I'm not, you know, including you in on some of this. And then I'm like, why aren't you including me? Oh, but thank you for doing that, you know? And so it's this like really interesting thing that we have to be in communication, just so often about where each of us are at, and how we're both then showing up to the problem of like racism and white supremacy. And that looks different for each of us. I think we have different roles in that, but it requires a lot of communication, a lot of understanding, a lot of the ability to like, I hope, mess up and say like, ouch, that hurt, or like, you're not understanding my point in this, or like, you're probably not thinking about that this affects me in a black way and it doesn't affect you in this way. But I feel just like ridiculously lucky that I have, you know, my partner who is somebody who just like learns so fast and has so much knowledge that like actually pushes me, and has pushed me to have different conversations even around race, which before Jonah, I think one of the things that we were kind of talking about was, you know, I was in a lot of spaces that dealt with like racial reconciliation. And that was really important for me at the time. But now I see how I think that that's actually not a helpful movement. And we have to actually move to liberation. And those things are different. And, you know, and Jonah actually was like, being in relationship with Jonah helped push me to get to that point. And so like, you don't often say like, I'm black and you moved me to like care about black people more. But like, that's how I think a really good loving relationship works, because we're able to challenge each other and speak into places that I would never let anyone outside of Jonah do that for. So I don't know if you have
Yeah,
to add.
I mean, so to your point, like if I could try and distill that, part of it is about making sure like we're both doing the work in our own time, right? Like I think one of the very valid critiques of white folks in interracial relationships is that it becomes a cop-out for not doing anti-racist work. That it's just like, well, my Black partner, or I have a Black kid, so, and it's like, no, no. And like, I think part of what makes this work is that like I was committed to anti-racism and Black liberation before Cameron and I met. And that's not to say that it can't work if somebody isn't already committed to that before they meet their partner. You can find an invitation to the party at any point, but like I can never sort of just defer to Cameron to like handle the things that matter to Black people. That's not faithful as a partner. I believe it's also not faithful as a Christian, that we all have a responsibility to do anti-racism work. I think you also alluded to like needing different kinds of supports, and like me taking some of the stuff I need to process as a white person, taking that to some of my white friends, and not always making Cameron be the primary support of my processing my whiteness. And that feels really important. And I think in general, just having lots of friends who understand things. We both have friends who identify with us racially. We both have friends who identify with each other racially. We both have friends who are in Black and white interracial couples. Like all of that matters because I can process this and not. I think sometimes one of the things that happens in any relationship, but often in queer relationships where folks get isolated, it can be like us against the world and everything has to be hashed out entirely internally. When in fact, like there are some stressors that require a lot of external support. And so being able to say like, hey, this is a really tough time to be Black in America right now. And it's also a tough time to be a white partner of a Black person. And so instead of making you the person that helps me figure out how to support you right now, I'm going to lean on some other people, including other white folks who are trying to figure out how to support their partners of color. So, yeah, I think there's one other thing I'll get to it I have got to remember it. It's really the answer there. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, thank you for all of that wisdom. I think, I definitely learned a lot in that. And I think that's so helpful for a lot of people is that, okay, I can seek support outside of this relationship sometimes because that's also necessary to have those people so we don't put all the emotional baggage on each other. And I think exactly like you're saying, especially right now in America, being a Black person in America and not putting my white problems on my Black partner or friend or whatever. Yes, I think that's thank you for that tidbit of knowledge there. Yeah, and so, as pastors, as queer people, as an interracial couple, what are, 2 life lessons that you would want to give young queer kids out there right now?
You got something?
It's possible to find love. I think that's something that, and it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be the first thing you find, and it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to hurt. I think that so many people I know, and I found myself in some of these situations that said, this is the best I'm gonna get. And that was hurtful. And I there were things and times that I know I could have been more healthy if I had made a decision to like, it's okay to be by yourself for a minute, because there is a possibility of love. Like this exists, and like I just didn't even think that this was possible. And so I just, don't settle. I think that's like
hashtag never settle.
That's a thing that we jokingly say a lot is like hashtag never settle, because like it can exist. It does exist. It's out there for you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think to kind of piggyback off of that in terms of advice, like being yourself, and like if there's something that that's true about yourself, that's like a part of who you are, repressing that is never gonna work forever. And like finding any space whatsoever that you can be out, whether that's like in your identity, or in other ways, like finding places to be seen and to express yourself is not only holy, but it prepares you best for real and authentic love. So I think one piece of advice would be like pursue the fullness of who you are. And if you're feeling like, oh, well, I just want a partner, for instance, like literally the best thing that you can do to find a partner who's going to love you well is to like become yourself the most possible. And I think that the second piece of advice that I give, especially in the context of like pride and queer love within a Christian context, is just to really like double down on that never settle thing. Cameron and I went really different paths on this. Cameron was in long-term relationships before he met me. I was single, like functionally single, like not in a explicitly committed relationship longer than several months. Basically until, I mean, like I alluded to being engaged in high school, or like high school age, it was college, but I was like 17 and I was engaged, but like to my best friend, like that was obviously complicated. I didn't have like an open and healthy relationship there. So I found that like when I was dating folks, nothing felt quite right. And I chose to just opt out of that. And so I was largely single until I was in my 30s and met Cameron. And that was really scary for me because I did think like, I'll never find somebody. I thought I should kind of lower my expectations, or at least like not expect that anybody who's going to be this queer or like up for this queerness and this radical and this political and whatever, like I should never expect that that person is going to believe in Jesus or is going to share my faith. But actually holding out and saying like, I need that, or recognizing that I needed it when it wasn't in those relationships and saying like, I just can't do this, was what made me available to meet a radical queer trans pastor who wanted to share his life with me. And so I think that believing in your own worth and that there are other folks who are like you, and holding out for that and encouraging one another to hold out for our right partners will actually be the thing that helps the most of us find the most satisfying love where we can be ourselves.
Yes, thank you for that wisdom. Thanks for speaking that into the world. I hope all of you that are watching and will watch this in the future feel validated in your love and are encouraged to, you know, if you ain't gonna love yourself, how the hell wait, how's that quote go? Oh my God, I messed it up. This is so embarrassing. I need
Lost your gay card. We have them, now it's gone. Yeah.
Yes, amazing. Great. So thank you both for being on the show today, for sharing your stories and your love and just your passion. Thanks again, everybody, for watching. I hope that this has been helpful for you, and maybe in your own coming out stories, folks, that this has been a healing balm for you. Thank you, Cameron and Jonah, for your time today.
Yeah, of course. Anytime. We're here anytime.
All right. Bye, everybody. We will see you sometime in the future.